Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying day 2 of Global Game Jam Prep Week here. And a lot of good content coming your way. Up next, we have Chris Blackwell from AWS for Games joining us to talk about how to implement AWS in your Game Jam projects. So I will leave it to Chris to take it away when he's ready.
All right. Sorry, I was getting some feedback there. Hopefully, this is sounding okay. Just going to share presentation and then I'll get started. All right. Well, good morning from Seattle and good day to wherever you are in the world. It's great to be here. My name is Chris Blackwell. I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS and I'm actually a specialist architect working specifically in game development. Just a quick background on myself. Started developing games as a kid in the 80s and have been in love with them ever since. Started professionally in the early 90s working at Maxis and have worked at several game studios like Maxis, Monolith, Gaspard Games, Humongous, Disney, places like that. And then the last 11 years have actually been at AWS working in game development and also game tech development, and have been transitioned over into the solutions architect role in the last year, which has been really exciting to kind of share what I've learned over the years as a game developer with customers and other game developers, and just been having a great time of it. So thanks for having me here today. Really excited for the Game Jam. I'm actually going to be on site in the Seattle, I guess it's the Redmond at Digipen at the meetup for that next week. So that should be really cool. And I'm going to go ahead and get started on my presentation. So today I am going to be talking about using AWS in your Game Jam. Seems far-fetched. I'm not kidding, though. It actually is possible. And I want to kind of go over today some ways that you can actually get backend services into your game up and running quickly, put some food for thought into your heads, maybe give you some ideas about how you could use online services to enhance your Game Jam game. Definitely, there are some AWS services that are more suited to game jams than others, and we'll cover that, which ones I think are going to be the easiest to get up and run quickly and fit in the span of a game jam game. I'm going to talk about some corners you can cut to actually make things faster, make it easier to integrate things. And basically, I've got some tricks that I'm going to share, tips and tricks that I think will help you actually integrate backend services into your game, again, in the time scale that a game jam game happens. Well, and actually, there's more than one trick, but, I had to use the old meme because why not? All right, so just a quick introduction to AWS for Games. AWS for Games, we have a team of folks here who are just dedicated to working with game developers and helping them use AWS Game Tech in their games. We offer everything from cloud development, so basically developing your game on AWS services, running things like your version control, build systems, even virtual desktops in the cloud, and being able to securely move your assets around and work with other developers and work cooperatively online. And then we also offer, of course, things like backend operations, running your game servers, analytics, AI, ML, all those things. AWS for Game Solutions really simplify how game customers use AWS, and that's our purpose here, is to help game developers get over the complexity of AWS, because it absolutely, if you get into the details, gets very complex. But we want to make it easier for you to get the right tools for your games, and figure out what parts of your game pipeline, your game development pipeline, and your game release can actually work on the cloud, helping you hopefully reduce the amount of resources you need, helping you adopt those services and make great experiences for your customers. Okay, so kind of get right into it. What is important for a game jam when you're thinking about technology you're going to integrate into the game jam? I came up with this 3 Fs. So hopefully these aren't too ridiculous, but having done a couple of game jams myself, these are the things that I really consider when I'm deciding what I'm going to actually adopt and use in my game. So first, it's got to be fast. You need to be able to integrate these features really quickly. Your game jam time is at a premium, obviously. Some of you, I know, do it over the course of a week. Some of you are going to do it in just a couple of days on a weekend. So you've got to have a really simple, really low friction setup. It's got to get out of your way and just work. Otherwise, it is not going to be worth your time trying to actually integrate something into your game. I think it's got to be free. This kind of goes without saying. This is a game jam. You're doing this on your own time. This is not a professional endeavor. You don't want to spend anything on your game jam game that has a short life. Maybe if it's a great idea and you bring it in production later, that's a whole nother ball game. But for the game jam game, just keep it free. I mean, that seems pretty obvious to me. And then this was a real stretch. I wanted to have 3 Fs. Funky. Originally, I actually had this termed novel, which meant basically this means that anything you add to your game should actually be meaningful and interesting. There should be a reason you're adding it to your game. And it's something that should help differentiate your game. Came up with funky because it works with F, but there you go. So these are kind of the criteria that I'm going to work on as we go through the presentation about how you would actually consider getting these services into your game. Okay, so this is a big warning. I am going to be making some suggestions that are not best practices for production code. These are things I would only ever recommend for a very short-lived experience like a game jam, something very experimental. Some of these have some pretty broad, I would say, security implications, but should be good in a short-term environment. And I'll be talking about some ways to protect yourselves against making sure that these hacks don't kind of bite you when you're working on them. So if in the slide you see this symbol, consider yourself warned. What I'm going to suggest is a terrible idea outside of the game jam. And I'm going to apologize in advance to my colleagues at AWS, especially my solutions architects friends who are going to kind of cringe at some of these suggestions because, again, they are not, I would call them almost worst practices rather than best practices, but these are things that are going to help you get these services up and running in your game as quickly as possible. Okay, so this next slide here, this talks about, these are basically services on Amazon that I have identified that I think would be actually useful in the context of a game jam. These are services that are either fully managed, which means that AWS basically handles all the resources of the service, so you can just basically use them, spin them up. They are, or they could be serverless, which means that there's no server configuration involved. If it's a managed serverless, then there's no servers at all. There could be a managed service that has a server, but in that case, again, AWS actually handles the resources of that server, so you don't have to actually worry about any setup or configuration of the server itself. That's all done by AWS. Second criteria is these all have a free tier. So when you're developing the game, there is going to be a set of things you can do. It's going to be either time, it's going to be the amount of calls. Anyway, there's going to be some way that you're able to use these for free during the context of your game jam, as long as that game is kept, to its sort of small footprint state. And then, at least in my imagination, all of these have some potential relationship to games. So just I wanted to quickly kind of go over what these services are. Some of these, some of the AWS names are not always obvious. But what we have on the left side here is we have Amazon Polly and Amazon Lex. Polly is a ML-driven speech synthesis, very realistic natural voices if you're looking to add speech to your game. Amazon Lex is speech recognition, where you can actually set up not just being able to decode speech into language, but also be able to do things like create triggers based on particular phrases that are ML. If you think about how Alexa work, where you can speak very freely and naturally to Alexa to get it to do things, you can use that same kind of parsing technology with Amazon Lex could be used to trigger things in your game. All kinds of interesting possibilities there. Amazon Recognition, another ML service. There's probably a pattern for these. If you see those sort of teal icons, these are all machine language or AI-based services. Recognition will basically look at images and video and can pick out different parts of those and kind of describe them with confidence as to what they are. Amazon Translate, probably that actually is a pretty obvious name. It translates from one language to another. Personalize is kind of an interesting tool where it allows you to basically look at user interactions and then create suggestions as to what maybe next steps would be. That one I always think about using in terms of if you have an inventory or a shop, could be suggesting what the next item for a player's progression might be, for example. And then the last one I have on the sort of most interesting column is Amazon Chime, which actually enables you to have real live both video, audio, and text chat. So the middle column, this is what I call the sort of AWS toolbox. These are things that are the bread and butter of AWS, and a lot of people use out in every context, but would be very valuable to games. Lambda, which is basically running serverless functions in the cloud. So you wrote code and they just run. And you can get the results through HTTP calls. There is DynamoDB, which is a key value database store. There's a lot more to it than that, but I need to go through these quickly, so I won't go too deep into it. S3 is a great place to store files of any size. Give secure access to files. AWS AppSync. This is basically allows you to synchronize configurations. If you imagine like save games or settings could be used and saved to the cloud and allowed other if you run the game on a different platform, you can have your settings really easily transition from one platform to another. It also does things like configuration merging. So if you change configuration on one platform, get synced to the other platform with no problem. Amazon Aurora, I've got a star by this. If you're using Amazon Aurora, make sure you choose the serverless option for a game jam. This will actually give you the ability to run a SQL-like database, or not SQL-like, but a SQL database in the cloud with, again, no provisioning of servers. Also noticed I forgot I had a star on DynamoDB. If you're using DynamoDB, make sure you set it to on-demand. On-demand is the model you're going to want to use, again, for a game jam, where it's not giving you any provisioned resources, so there's going to be no cost because it's only available as used. We've got Elasticache, which is a high-speed cache. Will be great for things like matchmaking, high scores, anything where you need really quick ephemeral storage. And then Amazon Cognito, which is a security service. Okay, in the last column, these are ones where they fit my criteria of being serverless or fully managed. Also have a free tier, but might need a little bit more imagination for you to figure out how they could actually use them in your games. Amazon Neptune is a graph database. So if you can imagine doing like social relationships, things like that, that's a great opportunity to use something like Neptune, where it can build those relationships. I've actually did a demo myself where I actually built relationships inside the game. So it actually creates like a whole NPC relationship graph that, and then works with players to decide kind of who has relationships with who's. Interesting possibilities there. Amazon TimeStream, which is a time stream database. Again, another sort of often used to drive ML, but has some interesting gameplay applications. Amazon Location Service. Location Service basically just looks at a player's information and can actually give you a best guess at what their location is in the world. Could be used for location-based games. Transcribe. This one is basically allows you to take audio and transcribe it into text. Shares some features with Lex, but it's much more around the transcribing the actual words as opposed to having the sort of triggering mechanisms. And then we have Comprehend, which basically allows you to analyze that text. Amazon IoT, which is Internet of Things, being able to control internet-enabled devices. Some really interesting uses of the gameplay there. Not sure that one totally fits into a game jam, although I have actually seen people introduce devices into games in a quick time, so could be some good stuff there. And then the interactive video service, which is basically allows you to include video streaming into your game. So again, these are the ones I thought had some game applicability. Obviously, there's a lot more services there, but these are ones that might be worth your time and could actually get you started really quickly. So with that overview, let's talk about how you would actually integrate these services into your game. So weird trick 0, start with an API. So a web API is going to be absolutely the easiest way to call your online services from your game for a couple of reasons. One is that most game engines actually have built-in support for web service calls. I've actually made a list here. So I've listed some of the more popular. I actually went through the last couple of years of Game Jam games to see what the most popular engines were. These top the list. Unreal Engine actually has support for web API calls both from C++ and from Blueprint if you use the VA Rust plugin. So that's pretty cool. Unity has the built-in Unity web request. Godot has HTTP request. Cocos 2D has HTTP client. And then if you don't see your favorite engine here, the engine you're going to be using for the Game Jam, just search the documentation for HTTP request or web service call, and you should be able to find that. Again, I found almost every game engine I looked at had some way to actually make web service calls. So that's the nice thing there is there's going to be no SDKs involved. You don't have to do any extra configuration for your game. You're just going to be using stuff that's already built into the engine, which will make it sort of the easiest, lowest path of friction. And AWS has great support for putting a web-based or HTTP-based or WebSocket-based API on the other side, which we'll talk about next. So API Gateway, that is what actually enables this. So API Gateway actually has a couple of different modes to allow you to create interfaces into AWS. There are HTTP interfaces, which are basically the easiest to configure. However, they have a limited way to connect them to services, which we'll talk about in a second. They rely a lot more on AWS Lambda, which I was talking about before as being your sort of serverless functions you can run in the cloud. That's actually fine for most people, but there are also standard REST APIs available. REST APIs are very feature rich, a little bit more configuration involved, and they have the ability to do something called proxying, which allows you to connect directly to specific Amazon services without having to go through a Lambda. I put the be careful, the potential not best practice here. Proxies aren't always the best way to call services because you're losing some of the protections you might get by abstracting those services behind a Lambda and having a little bit more control over how they're called. But again, in the context of a Game Jam game where you're pressed for time, might actually be very good to just say, my web API talks directly to DynamoDB rather than having to talk to a Lambda first and then put the data into DynamoDB. Then the last mode of the API Gateway is WebSocket. WebSockets are great if you want to be able to have stateful connections in your game. Stateful connections are going to be useful if you're trying to do things like have chat or voice streaming that's happening during the game real time, where you don't want to have to continue to make HTTP calls and you want to be able to get feedback back from the service without having to do anything like polling where it just comes back automatically. It also would be really useful if you want to do certain types of multiplayer games. So we'll talk about WebSockets a little bit more later on in the presentation. Again, these are all features of what we call API Gateway. And API Gateway is basically the easiest way to get APIs set up to connect to Amazon services in a secure and kind of correct fashion without having a lot of mess of trying to set up your own APIs through a hosted service or something like that. Okay, a little more info on WebSockets. Again, WebSockets are there when you need stateless connections. So things like chat or voice control are good targets for WebSockets. Unfortunately, WebSockets are not as widely supported in different game engines. Unreal and C++ do have Blueprint plugins for WebSockets, and Unity and Godot support them out of the box, but there were several that engines I looked at that did not seem to have WebSocket support or any plugins that I could find. So there is going to be kind of a more limited potential for using them here. And of course, WebSockets are going to add a little bit of complexity, meaning that you got to do state management, which of course you don't have to do on HTTP or REST because those are stateless services where you can just fire and kind of forget. WebSockets, you've actually got to keep like connection state, figure out what's going on and remember what that connection is doing at any given time. So there is some programming complexity there, making it a little bit more difficult to use. However, I'm going to put in here, there's a great tutorial, building a serverless chat app with a WebSocket API. This shows you how to actually integrate WebSockets and literally put a chat application that would work between two clients. This is a great starting point for any kind of WebSocket integration. Pretty straightforward and could be set up, fairly quickly for a Game Jam game. I don't know if we have a way to share links in the chat, but I've put a code here for you to scan if you need that. I will have links at the end as well. But hopefully, I know I've asked to have the links put in chat, so hopefully that's happening. But Tim can share links. I just a message from him, so hopefully I've got my colleague Diane here. She can give the links to Tim, and we can get those into the chat. All right. Okay. Next tip. This is one that I think is actually really important. Is that for your Game Jam game, I would really recommend creating a brand new AWS account that is not associated with any current account. Again, this goes against my typical best practices. We have something called AWS Organizations that allows you to integrate management of accounts into one place. The only problem with that is for a Game Jam is if you've already been using AWS services, having it in an AWS organization, basically the free tier, AWS free tier is shared by all your accounts in your organization. So if you set up an account that is completely different from or that is totally separate and totally not connected to any of your organizations, your free tier counter is going to basically reset itself. So you don't have to worry about getting any charges because you ran out of your free tier because you've already used it up in other accounts. So again, wouldn't normally recommend this. However, for a Game Jam game, for an experiment, it's probably the right way to go because you want to have that free tier reset. Also, it's going to be nice because you'll have a clean slate. You're going to have the resources that are in this account are only for your Game Jam game. There's not going to be any stuff hanging around that you got to worry about, or any potential, if you've got live services running on other things, they're not going to interfere. It's just a great way to kind of firewall what you're doing and keep it totally separate from all your other work. Plus, of course, you get that advantage of making sure that it's free. I've got a link here. This link is for getting set up for a new account. You can also search the web for that. It should be pretty straightforward. But that is where you're going to go and be able to sign up for a brand new account. All right. Next step, plan ahead. You've got a few days before the Game Jam starts. And I think I'm guessing that most people do this anyway, where you've got a whole bunch of sort of tips and tools and configuration you want set up because you want to get into the Game Jam and just be able to go and get started. I would really recommend, if you're going to get into using an AWS service, that you do a little bit of preparation beforehand so that you're ready to go with your ideas and work on the code versus the sort of I'd say undifferentiated heavy lifting, we call it, where it's the stuff that has nothing to do with the game necessarily, but it's going to be able to get you connected more quickly. Part of that is familiarize yourself with the services you want to use. Make sure you go and read documentation, make sure you understand it, make sure you're not getting into it and having to learn a service while you're on the fly in a Game Jam. Go ahead and read about it ahead of time. Then you're going to get into your Game Jam and you're just going to be, again, focusing on the game, not focusing on how do I get Lambda to work. Also, set yourself up a framework. Think about what services you might want to be using to wrap. It might want to be able to create wrappers around an API. You could actually set up an API to do some really common things, like if you want to call into a Lambda with a sort of generic set of parameters, you could do that. And actually, I see there's a question. So watching videos later, do these go on GGJ's Twitch and YouTube channels? I believe the answer to that question is yes. These will get saved on, so you can actually watch this again. I talked to Tim. Yeah, they'll be saved on YouTube and Twitch. So you'll absolutely, all this information, I know I'm going through it really quickly, so thank goodness this will be saved out, and you will have an opportunity to look at this later and go through all the slides and these things. So thanks. That's a great question. Okay, where was I? Okay, so ahead of time, create your API. Again, you can, if you get some pre-work done where maybe you have some generic API calls, get those put together, have those ready to go when you actually start working in your game. That would be very handy. You want to set up any IAM permissions. IAM is our identity access management in AWS, and it's basically a least privileged security layer. So there is a bit of, I'll talk about this a little bit more in more detail, but you definitely want to deal with any of the sort of letting one service talk to another service ahead of time so that you don't have to worry about setting up those IAM configurations when you actually get into your game. And then create a client framework. Make it really easy to make calls. Make it easy to do gets and posts to your different HTTP backend services. If you get that set up ahead of time, again, you'll have a nice set of APIs in your game, or you'll have the blueprint nodes that'll make it easy for you to actually call these services without having to worry about a lot of muss and fuss while you're building your game. So I promised I would talk about IAM. IAM is not actually that scary. It has a lot of complexity and depth. It's very powerful, but when you're working on something like a game jam or an experiment, you can actually focus just on what you need and totally ignore the complexity that IAM has. And in fact, many services like API Gateway and Lambda actually help you set up correct permissions. So if you go and look at some of the console configuration, you'll actually be able to do things like create new IAM roles, which is a role is basically what lets you connect one service to another. Take advantage of those shortcuts that are built into the console to make it easier for you to set up those permissions so you don't have to worry about how it works. So you'll see that in a lot of the configuration service configurations that I've talked about earlier. You'll be able to set IAM up through that service rather than having to go in and create these sort of complicated policies on your own. And also, if you do have to go into IAM itself, the console actually has templates and visual tools to help you speed up configuration. So here's an example of that where we can actually see the policy is just go in and click on what APIs you want to be able to access from one service to another and get those set up. So this is kind of I would say that IAM is what prevents a lot of people from thinking it's fast to get services connected together. There actually are a lot of tools to make it easier on you. And I would definitely encourage you to explore those tools to make that difficult configuration simpler. Last tip, this is another one of my worst practices. One of the things you can do in IAM policies is use wildcards, a star. Star can give you blanket permissions to things you don't necessarily need. However, it also is the fastest way to give you permissions. So if you don't have to sit there and think about all the different API configurations or the API calls you would need to make to work with a AWS service, just give blanket access from, let's say you want to have Lambda call S3, use star, bring in every API. So now you can make every API call from this AWS Lambda into S3. However, again, normally you don't want to be this permissive, but if you got to get the game on time, it's just go ahead and do that and make it easier on yourself for that short period of time. All right. Next tip I'm going to have is what you can do to keep things free. Again, this is really important. Game jam game. Don't want to have a lot of expense around this. Probably none. Free pizza is what you really want to think at a game jam. So what are some things you can do to make sure that your AWS services are free? So one is there's a thing called a budget in AWS, and you can actually set budgets up that will give you alerts and even give you actions you can take if there is any spend. One of the types of budgets we actually have is a zero spend budget, and I highly recommend turning on zero spend budgets. So if you go into the AWS budget setup, you can actually just search on the console for budget, use the templates that are provided, and then look for the zero spend budget. So the zero spend budget basically, well, as soon as anything tries to charge you for anything, you will get a notification, and you can actually have, you could even do things like turn your service off if you made a mistake there was some runaway cost. It would just shut things down, so you don't have to worry about that. So highly recommend setting up those zero spend budgets for a game jam game, just so you don't hit any potential snags. Also, aggressively use API throttling. API throttling is built into API Gateway and allows you to basically determine how often you want the gateways to be called. All often for things like Game Jam or Experiment, where I've got an open API, I'll do things like 1 call a second. That's going to make sure that somebody doesn't, DDoS you and suddenly cause your API to cost you money. But when that said, if you do decide to use API throttling, which again I recommend, make sure that your client code is able to handle 429 errors, which are too many request errors. So 429 will get triggered if I have a 1 second time throttling time on my API call. If I call it twice in the second, I'll get a 429 back for that second call. So just make sure that if that happens, that your code is able to retry those calls the next time, so that that'll be successful rather than causing a problem for your game. All right. Okay, fourth trick or tip: security. We don't need no badges. This is a huge worst practice. Generally with AWS, we are very, very concerned about security. I would say, though, that the security is the hardest thing to get right. And in the time frame of a game jam, it may be difficult. So one thing, for example, I would consider is that when you build your APIs, rather than having to have the user log in, you might consider avoiding just the whole login and have an API that's public that anybody can call. If you do that, make sure you use that API throttling in a budget. You don't want to have a public API that somebody discovers and suddenly you've got costs associated because somebody has found that API and is spamming it with requests. Absolutely. If you don't have security on your API calls, if it's an open API, put on that throttling, put on a budget. That'll keep you from having any spend from it, have you any nefarious people going and trying to cost you money. And then also, if your game is persisting or you want to have people play the game jam after when the judging has occurred and you want to have it kind of open and available for people to look at, then I would definitely say disable the resources that you have and or implement security that is required for a game that is going to be open to the public. Really important is once that game is public, you don't want to have any of this sort of low security stuff happening. That is going to definitely potentially cause you some problems in terms of cost or just people messing with your service. And then I have to say, I apologize and ask my colleagues. We take security very, very seriously at AWS. I do not want you to think this is something I would recommend at any other time other than the context of a game jam. Please be very careful if you implement something where you've got open APIs. All right. Next tip: Lambdas. Lambdas are great. I use Lambdas all the time. You write code in the cloud and it just works. There's no servers. You can choose lots of different languages. It's super easy to connect up to your APIs. We can see that what I'm showing here basically is my Lambda is talking to these two different. My API gateway is talking to these two Lambdas. This was one I did where it was like talk like a pirate Lambda or API. Super easy to hook these up. It's a first class. Lambdas are first class service to API gateway. They are your friend. They'll help you get things up and running quickly, and they will give you some control where if you need to have multiple services tied together, rather than talking to the service directly from API gateway, Lambda is the way to go. Also, you can do things like implement game logic. If you want to be able to actually have some server controlled game logic for parts of your game where, let's say, it's inventory control, or you want to be able to share state between two different clients, Lambda is a good way to potentially do that. And as I said, it offers many different languages that you can build Lambdas in. Probably one you're going to be familiar with. Just here's a list of some of the languages that are supported right out the gate. The top list of supported languages are actually supported right in the console with all of the editing tools that are available for Lambdas. So If you're looking at things like Python, Ruby, Node, those are all support, Java, first-class citizens inside the console to work on those Lambdas. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. And there's a nice editor. Editor built into the console. Fully featured editor has ability to test and run and do all kinds of good stuff for your Lambdas that are these functions running in the cloud. Probably easier than developing them locally and then uploading them. Just work on them right in the console. Again, this is for speed. I know a lot of people like to do the testing of Lambdas offline when they're doing production work, but for game jam work, why not just do it online? Use those tools, make it easy. All right. So aside from the services, managed services that you would typically call from an API, I also wanted to mention a few more services you could find useful for game jams that can help you get up and running quickly, but don't necessarily fit into the type of service that you would call for an API. So these don't fit into that first slide I showed that where it was managed serverless services. These all still do have a free tier, but they are something that you might consider if you want to look at a different kind of model. So Amazon Lightsail is basically pre-configured cloud resources that can get a typical web stack set up quickly. So if you're familiar with web app development and you want that to be part of your game, Lightsail could get you out of the gate really quickly with things like the Django stack or Node or LAMP. And there's a migration path to EC2 and other AWS resources if you wanted to take the service you built for your game jam and turn it into a sort of more traditional AWS service. So that could be a good option if you're familiar with those types of stacks and can work with those in an environment where you could put things together rapidly. Elastic Beanstalk is basically one abstraction layer above Lightsail. It provides managed application environment for applications developed in Go, Java, .NET, Node, Python, and Ruby. If you want to build a long-running server with a stateful interface, Beanstalk could be a good choice. Again, this is a serverless type service where you're writing code for it. It's slightly different than Lambda, but has a similar effect to Lambda. But it would be something where your Lambdas can basically run maximum of 15 minutes, whereas Beanstalk functions could last a lot longer if you wanted to have something that was really stateful and long running. AWS Amplify, this is an opinionated full stack framework. This is sort of the next layer of abstraction from Beanstalk, also primarily serverless. I've used it quite a bit in the past, and it really helps you get web apps up quickly. This is a great choice if you're building a web game using something like Phaser or Babylon, for example. This would be a way to actually have a web service backend that you could call and actually host those games from a website if you wanted to. Also, they just released a major new version, which I haven't had a chance to play with, but it's a code first model, which means that there's a lot less of this sort of like tool-based configuration that used to have that was a bit brittle. I haven't really had a chance to play with it yet, but it sounds like they've addressed a lot of the feedback that we had that was causing problems with Amplify. So I think Amplify could be a really good choice if you're building something like a Phaser game, a way to host your game and make it easy for people to get to and have a web service backend. GameLift real-time servers. Amazon GameLift, generally wouldn't recommend it for a game jam game because of the complexity. This is our managed game server hosting service, but there is one feature of GameLift called real-time servers where we actually manage all the server infrastructure and manage scripts. So all you do is you upload basically .NET scripts into this service, and it runs those scripts and allows you to have a quick setup, very lightweight server built on Node. The only downside here is this doesn't require you to install the AWS SDK into your game client, so it does have some configuration around that, and you would want to probably get that done ahead of time. But if you do set it up ahead of time, this could be another good way to get stateful multiplayer in your game where you have these sort of hosted scripts that run in the cloud. And the last one is sort of doesn't fit in any of the categories I could come up with, but AWS Deep Composer. A lot of people don't know about the service. I couldn't really figure out where else to put it in my show, but Deep Composer actually uses generative AI to build new music based on snippets of music or themes that you provide in the code. It's If you're looking to add some original music to your game in a hurry, Deep Composer can actually build that. You put the tunes in, it generates MIDI files, and those MIDI files can be downloaded and played back with whatever sound engine you have. It's definitely a different service for Amazon. And like I said, I don't think a lot of people know about it, but I wanted to get out of here. It's kind of fun to play with. It's a little weird sometimes, can create some very weird tunes, but also some really interesting original stuff. So looking for music for your game, maybe check out Deep Composer. It's one of those services that, like I said, doesn't fit in anywhere else, but is very interesting and has some potential interesting upsides for your game. All right, and so this is my last tip, getting towards the end of the presentation here. All of these horrible things I've talked about, shortcuts and bad practices, there is actually a way where you could make a much more robust, secure, and flexible backend with a lightweight client integration that is going to be much more like what you would see in a production game. And if you're okay to take the time on doing this, I would highly recommend. This is the game backend framework. It was actually written by one of my colleagues, Juho Jantunen. It's very quick to actually integrate. It contains client integrations for the most popular engines. It's got Unity, Godot, and Unreal integrations. I've got a link here to a YouTube video where Juho actually gets this backend up and running in 21 minutes, including a full client integration. What this is going to give you is it's going to give you a pre-configured REST API, like I talked about. It's going to give you authentication. So you do actually have that security, so you're not running open APIs to the world. Definitely is going to give you a layer of protection that you're not going to have if you use the open method that I talked about. And if you use this with a little prep work, you're actually going to find that you have production-ready, scalable solutions you can use that'll make your Game Jam backend basically production level robust. So this is definitely worth checking out if you're considering a little concerned about some of my not best practices that I've talked about. This is a way you could kind of secure that and make a more traditional authentication, keep people out of your game that you don't want, protect your API, and get that integration in your client up and running quickly. So definitely worth consideration if you're thinking along those lines. All right, and then last thing I wanted to mention is that tomorrow, same time, same place, one of our great AWS partners, Perforce, is going to be on giving a presentation. They're offering promotional credits. If you want to try Perforce on AWS, and especially during the Game Jam, you're going to actually be able to receive some credits to run that. If you want to be able to collaborate across the world with other people in your game, Perforce would be a great way to do that. So please tune in tomorrow, check it out. You can also send a request to the email address that's included here and include Global Game Jam, the subject line, and information, AWS account ID, which, as I mentioned before, if you're setting up free tier, make sure you set up your new account for that. And you'll get those credits applied. And it's a great way to be able to do collaboration with a great set of tools. I've used Perforce myself, probably going on 20 years. Great tool for working with games. Fast, speedy, handles large files. Love Perforce. So it'll be great to see them. I'm looking forward to their presentation tomorrow. All right, and on that note, that is it for me. I've got a link here to our AWS for Games website if you want to take a look at any more offerings. And I'm gone through all my tips. Record time. I was a little worried I wouldn't get through all the slides, but I managed to. And just wanted to open up if anybody has any questions or any comments. Glad to answer those. I'm watching. All right, so I got a question that's coming in here. What happens after the jam if someone implements AWS for Games and wants to continue using it? Sure. So the great thing is that when you have an account like this, any AWS account is going to last as long as you need it to. Once you've gone through the jam, all of those resources are going to still be there. And if you would like, at that point, I mentioned earlier AWS organizations. If you've got an AWS organization and you want to be able to manage all your AWS accounts from one location, I would take the organization you created separately for the Game Jam added into your AWS organization. So now you can do that central control. You'll have that free tier will now, you'll kind of lose that free tier. It'll go into whatever your organization's free tier is left. But it's just a much better way to kind of have like unified billing. And then I would also say that, again, I highly recommend, if you want to continue to use the AWS services after the Game Jam's lifespan, go through, look at those little fire icons I put in, and fix any problems you would have in there. Like, get rid of those open APIs, make them require security, make sure you have some way to actually have your players log in to the game to access resources. But other than that, there's really nothing that prevents you from using those services for long term. And in fact, I know that the Game Jam games are posted in an archive, and you can go back and play them. So if you wanted to leave them running, a little bit of work to make it more, I would say, a little bit more safe for players to use, but you could keep those up long term and probably even keep them free tier. If you don't have a huge number of people playing, then the free tier actually gives you a pretty good monthly amount of calls that can be put in. And then I guess on the bright side is, if your game gets super popular, you probably want to monetize it. So I would say at that point, go ahead and don't worry about those free tier limits, but see if you can make some money off that game. So, but yeah, that's a great question, and you absolutely can have those services around for as long as you need them, and build on them and expand them, and get a great platform going behind your game. Okay. Fernando asks, what are the most common mistakes that you often see on game jams? I really, the one I talked about, the tip of making sure that you plan ahead. If you're getting into the game jam and you're having to figure out your technologies, if you don't know how to use your editor, you don't know how to use your engine, you've got a new feature of your engine that you haven't really explored how to use it, you haven't built yourself a framework to build on. Those are all really important things, I think, to really get yourself to the point where when the game jam starts, you can hit the ground running. Because really, when you get into the game jam, all you want to be focusing on is the game. You don't want to be focusing on a bunch of nonsense that is just, it's going to be the same no matter what game it is. And you don't want to be reading documentation and trying to figure out a service and doing an experiment while you're doing your jam, because that's just going to interfere with your ability to actually get that game done. That would definitely be my number one thing that could really prevent you from being successful with your game jam game. I think the other one is, make sure you're taking breaks. It can be very easy to get caught up into this and just go. And then you find that you run out of steam. And if you haven't taken a break, gotten a little sleep, your mind kind of stops working, and you're actually going to wind up being slower than you would be if you had actually gone ahead and taken some time for yourself, taken a break out, had a good meal, had a nap. Take breaks. It's going to really help you actually produce your game faster. It sometimes seems counterintuitive, but that's something I've definitely found over the years, is that, man, I've done the all-nighters where I sleep under a desk and, I have a sleeping bag in my office, and it never worked out well. Don't do that. Bad idea. Great question, though. Thank you. Okay, is there an online community where people can ask questions and learn more about the technology? Yeah, actually, because I'm in the stream here, I don't have a really easy way to share it, but we actually have, there's an AWS forum site. It actually has a game tech, a game tech section in the forums. You can definitely search that in a search engine, Google, whatever you use. I wish I could give you the URL, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But if you look for AWS forums, you'll find them. Actually, another great community, and it's one that I go to a lot, is there is a Reddit subreddit, which is r/AWS. I actually go on there a lot, answer questions. There's a lot of really knowledgeable people there, and you can get answers really quickly. AWS forums tend to be, I'm not going to say that they're problematic, but It can take a bit longer. They're the official forums, and we definitely get a lot of people going there and from AWS to go and look at it, but it can take some time. Where I find that the AWS subreddit, you'll get answers within minutes, because there are a lot of people who are on that subreddit who may not be AWS folks, but they are super knowledgeable and can steer you in the right way. So highly recommend that. A great place to go and ask questions. All right, it's that awkward lull waiting for any new questions. Okay, are any examples you can think of from past game jams of games that implemented the services successfully? That is a really good question. This is this presentation is new for me, and I have not used services in a public game jam in this way. So I did participate in a couple of game jams in the past. I actually used to work on, what was once called AWS Lumberyard, which was a game engine that was forked off of CryEngine. And I did use Lumberyard in a couple of game jams fairly successfully. I was very familiar with it, so that helped. That's actually now called the O3DE, which is we basically open sourced it. Great renderer. Don't probably recommend it if you're not super familiar with the technology, just because it has some complexity. I definitely would find something like Unity or Godot or Unreal much faster to use in the context of the game jam. And then I actually built a system for Lumberyard, or worked on a system for Lumberyard called Cloud Gems. And Cloud Gems were a way to basically pre-package service configuration and an API to make it really fast to launch cloud services from Lumberyard. And what I did in particular, actually, one of the reasons I actually brought up Lex, Amazon Lex and Amazon Poly, which is the speech synthesis and the speech recognition, is I actually built a game jam game based on those services where you could what the idea was is that you could use speech recognition to do things like highlight sections of a map. In the little demo the jam demo that I did was very, 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 very simple Dota style tower defense, and you could say things like, "Hey, I need help in this lane," and then it would basically highlight on the map where you were, so you didn't have to go and like press a button to say, "Give me assistance over here." That is the only one that I can that I did in a public jam. That was probably like 5 years ago. Embarrassingly can't actually remember what the context was, but it did worked out really well. We had the integration for Lex and Poly that were built into Lumberyard, so that made it really fast to get up and running quickly, and it did work. I've also done some internal jams at Amazon. Unfortunately, I can't talk about what those were, but I have had some success on my own in actually getting those up and running quickly. Amazon actually has a culture of running jams, both game jams and sort of like service jams, where we'll work for a week or on a weekend or even just an evening, and try and build interesting stuff with the products we have. So there definitely is some kind of proof and that you can jam with services if you select them correctly and again do that homework of kind of setting things up ahead of time. Okay. Oh yeah, Diane is saying we've seen jammers use GameLift. So that's great. I don't know about that. That's awesome though. I know about GameLift, but I haven't actually seen it used in a jam. So that's good to hear. GameLift, I mentioned earlier, it's a managed game service, game servers. The idea there is that you can just basically upload your server binary, and then we manage all of the actual server scaling and server state, and we give you an API to basically get quickly connected into those services. That's another one where GameLift, as I said, does require you to integrate the AWS SDK into your game. So you would want to do that ahead of time. That's something you don't want to spend time during your game jam, because that configuration of actually getting it integrated into the engine could take a little while. But yeah, I could see that being used successfully. That's awesome. I'd love to know actually what those were. What's the best advice you ever heard on a game jam? It's coming from Fernando. What is the best advice I've ever heard on a game jam? Have fun. It's I think sometimes, especially in a competitive game jam, people can focus on the competition and lose the idea that this is just supposed to be a way to come together and have a blast. So always make sure you're doing it for the right reason. Anything you do that's a passion, you want to make sure you keep the fun. Otherwise, it just becomes a job, which could be a good job, but you don't want to be a job during your game jam. And I actually wish I had a better answer for that. I've only done a handful of public game jams. So I wish I had a better answer and had been through more. And in fact, I want to start participating in them more. It seems to be, life always gets in my way, but that's just an excuse. I actually really enjoy the camaraderie and we're all in this together, and sort of the craziness and excitement around game jams is a real blast. And I really enjoy being involved in them. I need to do more for sure. All right, it looks like we have no more questions coming in. So I think we can wrap this up. I really, really appreciate everybody coming and tuning in, and anybody who's watching the recording of this. I hope this has been valuable. Please come, go to the AWS for Games site. I've got my email address up here. Totally happy if you want to contact me and ask me some questions. Send me an email. Glad to answer questions. I go through my emails. I don't get a ton, so it's not like I'm going to be overwhelmed. But I'm always happy to answer questions or route you. If I can't answer a question, route you to a person who can answer a question, or get to the right team and get a question for you. So please take advantage of that. And everybody have a wonderful game jam. I hope you have a really good time and make some really cool games. And I am really looking forward to seeing what everybody produces from this. This is super exciting. First global game jam I've been involved with. I know that we've had some colleagues in the past on global game jams. This is my first, so really psyched to see what people are coming up with and get this going. But with that, have a great day. Thanks everybody. I really appreciate your time.